What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. I am not sure I remember all the details correctly, but anyway. A guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. I was in class in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the class spoke and while breaking down in tears said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. Back in the 70s, some friends and I planned a camping trip to northern Cali for a long weekend. We packed up and headed north on the highway. Somewhere around Bakersfield we picked up a hitchhiker headed to Kernville, who we dropped off before heading further north. So we get to our campsite and start getting things set up. My GF finds a note tucked into the top of her backpack. It read, "I could have killed all of you. None of us slept that night." I had an associate that was a fireman. He had to go find the head of his brother-in-law after a car accident. Then he had to console his sister when she heard. Tough bloke. Can you imagine that being your day? My baby's crib caught fire in the middle of the night. Some people's literal worst nightmare. Edit. My baby was in it and he was severely burnt and spent a month intubated and in a medically induced coma. He is 5 now and is okay though. The fire was a freak accident. His humidifier caught fire, smoldered for a little while and drained the oxygen in the room before the smoke alarm went off. When we opened the door to his room, it flooded with oxygen, creating a backdraft and launched a fireball at his crib. This was his crib the next day. Find the link in the description. My mom's best friend was murdered by a man because she broke up with him. After reading these, I'm never doing anything with anyone ever again. I was robbed at gunpoint in front of my house. He had the gun pressed into the back of my head. He took my money and jewelry and took off. He was arrested an hour later. This week in Cologne. From the wall next to Autobahn, a concrete plate fell down into ongoing traffic and hit one car, killing the driver. After the inspection, they found another 6 plates that weren't properly constructed, just like the one that fell down. Short story. My wife is from Enterprise, OR, and I guess a kid in her school got beheaded on his way home. Was literally found with his head cut off on the side of the street, and to this day no one knows who did it or how it happened. Absolutely gives me chills. This happened to a girl I know. She came back home with her Tinder date. They were both drunk and high, a little. She went in to change and when she came back to her bedroom, her date bent down to remove his shoes. As he got back up, he violently dragged her, against her will. She struggled and he covered her mouth. Took her all the way outside of her place, out of her apartment complex, with a strong hold. Then finally he let her go and she asked him what the duck was wrong with him. He told her that a man was hiding under her bed. Well, there's that story about a woman who was found pushing her baby had been dead on a swing for 2 days. The baby died from hypothermia and dehydration. She was found not criminally negligent due to schizophrenia. Find the link in the description. I live on a dead-end street. One day I was cleaning and heard my younger daughter talking, but my older daughter was at school so we were home alone. I go into her room and there's a man on the street she was talking to through her window. I quickly ran outside to catch him, but her was gone. A few weeks later my older daughter was riding her bike then quickly came inside crying and panicking. She said an old man was trying to talk to her while she was riding her bike. She described the guy the first saw talking to my younger daughter. I reported it and haven't heard anything back. I swear if I ever get my hands on him I'll be happy to go to jail. I'm sure this will get buried but got a call on my birthday 3-ish years ago that my adopted sister was arrested for murdering her bio mom. They were both call girls, mom and daughter duo. And the mom threatened to tell the police about some John they had been with. Adopted sis didn't like that. Hit and stabbed her over 30 times with a 2x4, a knife, and something else can't remember. Then took a friend's truck and dropped the body near a river while the mom was still alive and bleeding. Body was found about a week after the initial incident. I literally grew up sharing a room with her. Thinking about the times when I ticked her off because sisters has left for many a night of bad dreams. Few years ago, I worked at a bar near a forested area. One day, it was like 10 p.m. and some random kid comes running and screaming and saying, "My mommy and daddy are trying to kill me." Shortly after, a woman and a man enter the bar, presumably his parents. They ask me if I saw where our son went. I said no and they exit, muttering to themselves. I call the police and they come like 13 minutes later. They search the area for the parents and take the kid with them, and that's all I remember. I just remembered another one. My sister has a friend whose mom woke up during her C-section. The anesthesia wore off but she still couldn't move. She described doing everything she could to scream. She managed to make a small noise and they immediately put her back under. She still cries telling the story. I can't imagine the pain. A dude got crushed while working on an elevator on a cruise ship. Basically how I imagined this irrational fear would be before this ended up actually happening. And come to find out it happens a lot. But then they reported it on the news with the blood and everything raining down from above the elevator lift carriage. If you Google you can probably find even clearer footage but Jesus what a mess. Find the link in the description. After reading, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, about the Golden State Killer I literally could not sleep at night for a few days. I ended up taking a day off work so I could get some sleep during daylight. That book messed me up. Not to spoil anything, but it was before recent developments, but also I just couldn't get it out of my mind. My cousin's boyfriend and his brother are twins. They were in their hometown visiting their parents one weekend and went out for a few drinks. They got chatting to this guy who was out on his own and ended up going to a couple of different places with him. He said he'd just got out of a relationship and was just out enjoying being single. A couple of days later, they say this guy in a local news story. Turns out he had murdered his girlfriend that evening and then gone out drinking. My next door neighbor had a 14-year-old girl who was kidnapped, raped, and then set on fire. The perpetrator still hasn't been caught, and this was 6 years ago. We've had 5 more cases of underage girls being kidnapped, raped, and set on fire since then. The guys doing it seem to do it once a year. But the 5 cases are the only ones we know about. There's no telling how many actual victims there are. Well, it isn't scary but pretty disturbing. The attack of the dead men in Fort Ossowiec, Poland, WWI. Guy had $1,500 stolen from him in Vancouver, Washington, so he kidnapped the thief, took him out to the woods and tied him to a tree. Then came back 4 days later, beat him with a baseball bat and then left him forever. True story. Saw a Daedric armored man in the door of my bedroom when I was 5. I still remember it like it was yesterday. This one was told to me. A woman in Colorado worked at a corporation and there was a guy who started hanging around in the parking lot. Because it was a large corporation, I'm guessing that the parking lot was large. Anyway, he started stalking her and I don't know how much time had passed but he kidnapped her and took her up to a cabin in the mountains. He didn't murder her right away but she was held against her will for several days. He tortured her before he killed her. This happened I'm guessing sometime in the late 1970s, possibly mid-1980s. The person who told me this story didn't know the woman well but worked in the same building as she. The man was caught and since the person who told me this story didn't follow the case when it went to court, I don't know the outcome. The entire fucking I am a total piece of shit subreddit. This is the scariest UAVE been told so far and actually happened a few hours ago. My aunt's neighbor's son, 21, was killed, diced and thrown into a water tank after a fight he had. Really ducked up. Happened in India, but we got the news a bit later as we live in Singapore. When I was a kid, my bike got stolen. A week later, the guy who stole my bike was found dead. The night of that guy's death, my dad woke me up and asked me to sleep on his bed. Later I learned that loud banging and scratching sounds were heard on my window that lasted for over a week. What's scary here isn't necessarily the news, but the amount of people that did this. Basically priests doing teenage boys. All over the ducking country. Oh, and also strolling money. Romania full score. Warning, might not be for the faint of heart. A couple years ago in my town, there was a guy going to random people's houses in the middle of the night and ringing their doorbells. As soon as the person opened the door, he'd hit them in the chest with an axe. The police tried setting up patrols, but he'd go to different parts of town every night. Word got around, and eventually he rang his last doorbell. An older guy answered the door with a shotgun ready. He said when he saw the axe drawn back, he immediately pulled the trigger. He said the guy screamed, "You got me," and started laughing and coughing up blood until he went silent. I had brain surgery roughly 3 years ago. I lost my concept of time. What felt like 4 months was only 3 days. The amount of physical, mental, and emotional pain I went through was crazy. I had to find all of my memories and relearn how to walk, talk, everything. If you want to go through something terrifying, that is it. Not Petya. Russian cyber attack in 2017 that destroyed thousands of computers and caused 10 billion worth of damages. My country has been an independent country for 12 years now. All of my family has experienced the war, but me. Once someone told me a story about a woman whose family was slaughtered and put into a pot alongside the soup that was being cooked. I was terrified. Wait, before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe, you sexy human.